On an ordinary day, a millionaire receives a call that shatters all the certainties of his life. On the other end of the line, a humble young woman warns him that his son is in danger. Without a second thought, he abandons everything and runs desperately to find the boy. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. Richard Thornhill was accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life. As the CEO of Thornhill Innovations, one of New York City's most prestigious tech companies, he had built an empire from nothing, transforming himself from a middle-class kid from Connecticut to a Wall Street legend. His penthouse overlooking Central Park represented everything he had achieved: success, power, and the ability to have whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. On this particular Tuesday morning, Richard sat in his corner office on the 52nd floor of the gleaming Thornhill Tower in Midtown Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city he had conquered. The walls were adorned with awards, magazine covers featuring his face, and abstract art worth more than what most people earned in a decade. Richard adjusted his custom-tailored Armani suit as his executive assistant. Melissa entered the room. "Mr. Thornhill, the board members are waiting in the conference room," she announced, her voice crisp and professional. "Tell them 5 minutes," Richard replied without looking up from the quarterly reports on his tablet. "And get James on the line. I need to know where we stand with the Singapore contract." This was Richard's world, a carefully orchestrated symphony of business deals, strategic decisions, and calculated risks. Today's board meeting would finalize the acquisition of their biggest competitor, a move that would solidify Thornhill Innovations as the undisputed leader in financial technology. So everything was going according to plan, just as Richard liked it. At 45, Richard had achieved what most people only dreamed of. Yet beneath the polished exterior and confident demeanor lay a complicated man. His personal life hadn't enjoyed the same success as his professional endeavors. A divorce 3 years ago had left him with joint custody of his 8-year-old son. Ethan, the one person who could penetrate the armor Richard had built around himself. As he stood to head to the meeting, his private phone rang. Richard glanced at the screen, expecting to see his ex-wife's name or perhaps his son's prestigious private school calling. Instead, an unknown number flashed on the display. He almost declined the call. Unknown numbers typically meant solicitors or wrong numbers, but something made him answer. "Thornhill," he stated briskly. The voice that came through the speaker was young, female, and trembling with urgency. "Mr. Thornhill, is this Richard Thornhill, Ethan's father?" Richard's posture stiffened. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Maya Garcia. You don't know me, but your son is in danger, right now." The world around Richard seemed to freeze. The bustling city outside his window, the waiting board members, the impending business deal, everything faded into the background. His heart began to race, and for the first time in years, Richard Thornhill felt something he had almost forgotten: fear. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Please, there's no time to explain everything," Maya continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I work at the community center near Riverside Park. Ethan is here on a field trip with his class. I overheard something, some men planning to—" She paused, struggling to find the right words. "They know who he is, who you are. They're watching him right now. You need to come immediately." Richard's mind raced through possibilities. Was this a scam? A kidnapping attempt? How did this woman know his son? Ethan was supposed to be at the Wellington Academy, his elite private school on the Upper East Side. "Mr. Thornhill, please." Maya's voice broke through his thoughts. "I know this sounds crazy, but I wouldn't call if it wasn't serious. Ethan is wearing a blue school blazer and khaki pants. He has a Spider-Man watch on his left wrist that he keeps looking at. He told me it was a birthday present from his dad. The Spider-Man watch. Richard had given it to Ethan just 2 weeks ago for his 8th birthday. This woman, whoever she was, had seen his son up close. "Where exactly are you?" Richard asked, already moving toward the door, his voice tight with controlled panic. "The West Side Community Center near 86th and Riverside. Please hurry." Without another word to Maya, Richard ended the call and burst out of his office. "Cancel the meeting," he barked at Melissa, who looked up in shock. "Get my car ready now, and call Wellington Academy. Find out where Ethan's class is today. "Sir, the board has been waiting for the— Now, Melissa," he shouted, an uncharacteristic display of emotion that left his assistant momentarily stunned before she scrambled to comply. In the private elevator that whisked him down to the building's garage, Richard called his head of security, Michael Stevens, a former Navy SEAL who had been with Richard for 5 years. "Stevens, meet me at the Westside Community Center immediately. It's about Ethan." The calm in his voice was forced, masking the storm raging inside him. As his custom Bentley pulled out of the underground garage and into the congested Manhattan traffic, Richard felt a helplessness that no amount of money or influence could alleviate. He instructed his driver to ignore traffic laws if necessary, then called his ex-wife Charlotte. "Was Ethan's class scheduled for a field trip today?" he asked without preamble. "Richard? Yes, they're studying local community services. The school sent an email last week," Charlotte replied, confusion evident in her voice. "What's going on?" "Which community center?" he pressed, ignoring her question. "The West Side one, I think." "Richard, you're scaring me." "What's happened?" "I'm handling it," he said shortly before ending the call. The confirmation from Charlotte only heightened his anxiety. This Maya person had been telling the truth, at least about Ethan's location. Richard's mind filled with terrible scenarios as the car weaved through traffic, his driver honking and swerving around slower vehicles. Who was Maya Garcia? Why would she risk calling him? The community centers in New York were typically staffed by people from working-class neighborhoods, people who lived in a completely different world than the one Richard inhabited. What could she possibly gain from this? As the car approached the Upper West Side, Richard's thoughts turned to Ethan, his son, bright, curious, and possessing a kindness that sometimes made Richard wonder if the boy had inherited anything from him at all. After the divorce, Richard had thrown himself even more completely into his work, compensating for his guilty absence with expensive gifts and elaborate outings during his weekends with Ethan. Deep down, he knew it wasn't enough, but it was all he knew how to give. The Bentley screeched to a halt in front of the community center, a modest brick building that stood in stark contrast to the gleaming skyscrapers of Richard's daily life. He leaped from the car before his driver could open the door, his heart pounding against his ribs. The center's lobby was busy with children and adults moving between activity rooms. Richard scanned the crowd frantically, looking for Ethan's familiar face or the blue blazer of his school uniform. A group of children in matching blazers caught his eye across the room, but Ethan wasn't among them. "Ethan!" Richard called out, drawing stares from nearby adults. "Ethan Thornhill." "Mr. Thornhill?" Richard spun around to find a young woman approaching him. She was perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were modest, jeans with a faded community center t-shirt, but it was her eyes that caught his attention. They held a mixture of relief and trepidation. "I'm Maya Garcia. I called you," she said, her voice matching the one from the phone. "Ethan is in the art room. I moved him away from the windows after I called you." "Take me to him." "How?" Richard demanded, struggling to keep his voice level. Maya nodded and led him down a hallway lined with children's artwork. "I'm an assistant coordinator here," she explained as they walked. "When I saw those men watching Ethan and heard what they were saying—" "What men?" Richard interrupted. "What exactly did you hear?" Before Maya could answer, they reached a classroom where several children sat at tables working on art projects. Among them was Ethan, his head bent in concentration as he carefully applied paint to a piece of paper. The sight of his son, safe and oblivious, sent a wave of relief through Richard so powerful that he had to steady himself against the doorframe. "Dad?" Ethan looked up, surprise and delight spreading across his face. "What are you doing here?" Richard crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled his son into a tight embrace, not caring about the paint that smeared onto his expensive suit. He held Ethan as if he might disappear, breathing in the scent of his hair, feeling the solid reality of him. "Mr. Thornhill," Maya said softly from behind him. "Can I speak with you in the hallway? Ms. Peterson can watch Ethan for a moment." Reluctantly, Richard released his son. "I'll be right back, buddy. Stay right here, okay?" Once in the hallway, Richard turned to Maya, his relief giving way to suspicion and anger. "Explain everything, now." Maya took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting nervously with the hem of her shirt. About an hour ago, I noticed two men near the playground. They were watching the Wellington kids, specifically Ethan. I heard them mention your name and something about teaching Thornhill a lesson through his kid. Richard's blood ran cold. Did you call the police? I was about to, but then they moved closer to the building. I was afraid they'd take him before help arrived, so I brought all the kids inside for an impromptu art session and called you directly. Maya's eyes reflected genuine concern. I know how this looks, a stranger calling you with a story like this, but I couldn't just do nothing. Every child deserves to be safe, regardless of who their parents are. There was something in her simple declaration that struck Richard. In his world, people rarely did anything without expecting something in return. How did you get my private number? He asked, still wary. Ethan had an emergency contact card in his backpack. When I asked if I could look at his Spider-Man watch, I managed to check his information too. I'm sorry for the intrusion, but I was scared for him. Richard studied Maya's face, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives. He found none, only concern and a kind of quiet courage that seemed at odds with her modest appearance. Where are these men now? He asked. I don't know. After I brought the kids inside, I had my colleague Lewis watch the entrance. He said they left in a black SUV about 10 minutes ago. Richard's phone buzzed. Stevens had arrived with 2 other security team members. My security team is here. They'll want to talk to you and review any surveillance footage. Maya nodded, though her expression suggested she was uncomfortable with the sudden seriousness of the situation. As Stevens and his men entered the building, Richard found himself caught between the world he commanded with ease and this unfamiliar territory, where a young woman of modest means had potentially saved his son from harm. For the first time in years, Richard Thornhill felt the foundation of his carefully controlled life begin to shift beneath his feet. Maya Garcia had not always planned to work at the West Side Community Center. Growing up in a working-class family in the Bronx, she had dreamed of becoming a teacher. Her parents, her father a maintenance worker, and her mother a home health aide, had instilled in her the value of education and service to others. They had sacrificed everything to give Maya and her younger brother opportunities they never had. But life had other plans. During her second year at City College, her father suffered a serious back injury that left him unable to work. With her mother already working double shifts, Maya had no choice but to drop out and take whatever jobs she could find to help support the family. She worked as a barista, a retail clerk, a dog walker, anything to keep the bills paid and food on the table. The community center job had been a blessing. Though it paid little, it offered regular hours and the chance to work with children, keeping her connected to her original dream of teaching. For 2 years now, she had coordinated after-school programs, assisted with field trips, and created a small reading corner that had become popular with neighborhood kids. Maya's studio apartment in Washington Heights was tiny but clean, decorated with second-hand furniture and colorful posters. She shared it with her calico cat, Frida, named after her favorite artist. The building had its problems: unreliable heat in winter, neighbors who played music too loudly, a landlord who took his time making repairs. But it was home. Maya had learned to find joy in small things: a good book from the library, homemade tamales from her mother's recipe, sunset views from her fire escape. On this particular morning, Maya had arrived at the community center at her usual time of 7:30 a.m., preparing for the Wellington Academy field trip. These visits always stirred mixed emotions in her. While she enjoyed introducing privileged children to community service, the stark contrast between their lives and those of the regular community center kids was sometimes difficult to witness. She had been setting up an art project when Lewis, the center's security guard, mentioned the Wellington bus arriving. Maya went outside to greet them, clipboard in hand, ready to check in the visiting class. That was when she first saw Ethan Thornhill. Unlike some of his classmates who regarded the community center with barely concealed disdain, Ethan seemed genuinely curious. He asked Maya questions about the center's programs and listened attentively to her answers. When she mentioned the reading corner, his eyes lit up. "I love reading," he exclaimed. "Dad says I read too much, but Mom says there's no such thing." Maya smiled at his enthusiasm. Your mom is right. What kinds of books do you like? Adventure stories, mysteries, and books about space. I want to be an astronaut or maybe a scientist, Ethan replied, proudly showing her his Spider-Man watch. My dad gave me this for my birthday. Spider-Man is a scientist too, you know. Peter Parker works in a lab. There was something endearing about Ethan's combination of childlike excitement and surprising maturity. While his classmates clustered together, maintaining the social hierarchies they'd brought from school, Ethan seemed content to explore independently, taking in everything with wide-eyed interest. During the scheduled activities, Maya kept an eye on all the children, but found herself especially aware of Ethan. Something about his openness and the way he treated everyone, from the centers, staff to the local kids who stopped by after school with the same friendly curiosity made him stand out. The morning passed uneventfully until Maya stepped outside to help prepare for the lunch break. That was when she noticed the two men in the black SUV parked across the street. At first, she thought nothing of it, just another car in a city full of them. But as she observed them from the corner of her eye while setting up tables, she realized they were watching the children on the playground. Specifically, they were watching Ethan. Maya moved closer to the fence, pretending to pick up trash, straining to hear their conversation through the partially open window of their vehicle. That's definitely Thornhill's kid, one man said. The Richardson deal goes through tomorrow unless we can persuade him otherwise. Boss was clear. We just need to scare him, remind him what matters most, the second man replied. Grab the kid, take a few pictures to send as a warning, then let him go before anything's reported. Thornhill thinks he's untouchable. Let's see how tough he is when it's his kid on the line. A chill ran down Maya's spine. She had no idea who Richard Thornhill was beyond what she'd heard about wealthy New Yorkers, but she knew a threat when she heard one. Without drawing attention to herself, she walked back to the playground and began rounding up the children. Who wants to do some cool art projects inside? She called cheerfully, masking her fear with enthusiasm. I've got a special surprise activity. As she guided the children inside, Maya made sure Ethan was in the middle of the group, shielded from view. Once inside, she quickly found the emergency contact card in his backpack while helping him put away his jacket. Now, standing in the hallway with Richard Thornhill himself, a man whose tailored suit probably cost more than her rent, Maya felt the full weight of her decision. She had inserted herself into a situation she didn't fully understand, involving people whose world was completely foreign to her. After Richard's security team arrived, everything happened in a blur. Men in dark suits interviewed her, reviewed security footage, and took notes about everything she'd seen and heard. Maya answered their questions as clearly as possible, trying not to feel intimidated by their professional demeanor and obvious expertise. Through it all, she kept thinking about Ethan, an innocent child caught in adult conflicts he couldn't comprehend. She thought of her own childhood, of the safety her parents had worked so hard to provide despite their limited means. Some things, she believed, transcended social boundaries. A child's safety was one of them. When the interviews were finally over, Maya returned to the art room to check on the children. Wellington Academy had decided to cut the field trip short, and the students were preparing to leave. Ethan was gathering his things when Maya approached him. "Are you okay, Ethan?" she asked gently. He nodded, though confusion showed in his eyes. "Dad says we have to go." "Is it because of those men you saw?" Maya blinked in surprise. "You knew about them?" "I saw them watching me at recess. They didn't look nice," Ethan admitted, "so I was going to tell Ms. Bennett, but then you brought us inside for art." She marveled at his perceptiveness. "That was very observant of you. Dad says I notice things other people miss," Ethan said with a hint of pride. "Are you in trouble for calling him?" "You look worried." "No, I'm not in trouble," Maya assured him, touched by his concern. "I just wanted to make sure you were safe." "Thank you," he said with a seriousness that seemed beyond his years. "Not everyone would have done that." Before Maya could respond, Richard appeared in the doorway. "Time to go, Ethan." The boy gave Maya a quick wave before joining his father. As they turned to leave, Richard paused and looked back at her. "Miss Garcia," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to command. "My security team will finish their investigation here. I'd like to speak with you further about what happened today. Would you be available to meet me at my office tomorrow morning?" The request, phrased as a question but delivered as an expectation, took Maya by surprise. "I work tomorrow," she replied, a simple statement of fact that seemed to momentarily confuse Richard. "I'll speak with your supervisor," he said, as if that settled the matter. 10 o'clock at Thornhill Tower. "My assistant will email you the details." Before Maya could explain that her responsibilities couldn't simply be rescheduled at the whim of a wealthy businessman, Richard and Ethan were gone, leaving her standing in the suddenly quiet art room. Later that evening, Maya sat on her fire escape, watching the lights of the city flicker on as dusk settled over Manhattan. Frida purred contentedly in her lap as she sipped tea from a chipped mug and tried to process the day's events. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lewis. "You okay?" "Crazy day with those rich folks." Maya smiled slightly. "I'm fine," she texted back. "Just worried about the kid." "You did the right thing," Lewis replied. "Not everyone would have stepped up like that." His words echoed Ethan's earlier comment, making Maya reflect on the choices she'd made. In truth, there had been no choice at all, not really. Faced with a child in potential danger, Maya had acted on instinct, without considering the complications that might follow. Now those complications loomed large. An email had arrived from Melissa Peterson, executive assistant to Richard Thornhill, confirming her 10 a.m. appointment at Thornhill Tower. A car would be sent to collect her at 9:30. Her supervisor had already approved her absence, apparently swayed by whatever Richard had offered in exchange. Maya couldn't help but feel a flicker of resentment at how easily money and power had rearranged her schedule without her input. At the same time, she was curious about Richard Thornhill. Behind the commanding presence and expensive suit, she had glimpsed something unexpected, the raw fear and love of a father terrified for his child. It had humanized him in a way that surprised her. As night fell over the city, Maya wondered what tomorrow would bring. The Thornhills existed in a New York that barely intersected with hers, a world of penthouses and private schools, of cars with drivers and offices in gleaming towers. Tomorrow, for reasons she couldn't quite fathom, she would step into that world. Before going to bed, Maya called her mother as she did most nights. "Mommy, if a very rich, important person asked to meet with you, what would you wear?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Her mother's laugh was warm and knowing. "Mika, what have you gotten yourself into now?" "It's nothing bad," Maya assured her. "I just helped someone today and now they want to talk about it." "Wear something that makes you feel strong," her mother advised. "And remember, no matter how rich or powerful they are, they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like everyone else." Maya smiled, comforted by her mother's practical wisdom. "Thanks, Mommy, I love you." "I love you too, Mija. Be careful, but be yourself." After hanging up, Maya stood before her small closet, considering its modest contents. She eventually settled on a simple navy blue dress, the one she'd worn to her college interviews years ago. It was the most professional thing she owned, though it felt inadequate for a meeting in a Manhattan skyscraper. As she prepared for bed, Maya found herself thinking again about Ethan Thornhill and his Spider-Man watch. Children like him were raised to believe they could be anything. Astronauts, scientists, superheroes. Their futures stretched before them, unlimited by circumstance or necessity. Maya didn't resent Ethan for his privilege. How could she? He was just a child, kind and curious, unaware of the advantages his birth had granted him. But she couldn't help wondering what her own life might have been like with even a fraction of the opportunities afforded to him. With a sigh, she set her alarm and turned out the light, Frida curling against her side. Tomorrow she would enter Richard Thornhill's world, a brief visitor to a life she could hardly imagine. Tonight, she would rest in her own small corner of New York, surrounded by the familiar sounds of her neighborhood settling into sleep. Across the city, in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Richard Thornhill stood at the window, watching the same nighttime sky but from a very different vantage point. Ethan was asleep in his bedroom, safe and unaware of how close he had come to danger. Richard's mind, however, was far from at ease. The security team's preliminary investigation had confirmed Maya's story. The men in the SUV were connected to James Richardson, Richard's chief competitor, and the owner of the company Thornhill Innovations was set to acquire tomorrow. It appeared Richardson was willing to go to extreme lengths to prevent the takeover, but it wasn't Richardson who occupied Richard's thoughts as he stared out at the city lights. It was Maya Garcia, the young woman who had potentially saved his son from a traumatic experience, perhaps worse. In Richard's world, people rarely acted without calculating the personal benefit. Yet Maya had put herself at risk for a child she barely knew, with no expectation of reward. Tomorrow, Richard would find out more about Maya Garcia. Tonight, for the first time in years, Richard Thornhill found himself questioning the values that had shaped his life and the world he had created around himself. At precisely 9:30 the next morning, a sleek black car pulled up in front of Maya's apartment building in Washington Heights. The driver, a middle-aged man in a pressed uniform, stepped out and scanned the street before checking his phone. Maya, who had been watching anxiously from her window, took a deep breath and gathered her belongings. She had woken up 2 hours early to prepare, washing her hair and applying minimal makeup with a steady hand, despite her nerves. The navy dress fit as well as it had years ago, and she had paired it with her only pair of low heels and a cardigan to ward off the autumn chill. As she locked her apartment door, Mrs. Diaz from across the hall emerged with her recycling. "Look at you, all dressed up," the older woman remarked. "Job interview?" "Something like that," Maya replied with a small smile. "Wish me luck." "You don't need luck, mijita," Mrs. Diaz said with a wink. "Just remember who you are." Outside, the driver held the car door open for her. "Ms. Garcia?" "I'm Frank. Mr. Thornhill sent me to bring you to Thornhill Tower." The interior of the car was immaculate, with soft leather seats and dark-tinted windows that separated the passenger compartment from the driver. As they pulled away from the curb, Maya caught a glimpse of her neighbors watching with undisguised curiosity. A girl from Washington Heights being picked up in a luxury car was not an everyday sight. As they traveled south through Manhattan, Maya watched the neighborhoods change outside her window. The familiar bodegas and apartment buildings of Uptown gave way to the manicured streets and towering skyscrapers of Midtown. When they finally stopped in front of Thornhill Tower, a gleaming spire of steel and glass that seemed to pierce the sky, Maya felt as if she had traveled to another country rather than just a few miles from home. The lobby was a vast expanse of marble and modern art, with a security desk that resembled something from a science fiction movie. After presenting her ID and receiving a visitor's badge, Maya was escorted to a private elevator that required a keycard to operate. "This will take you directly to the executive floor," the security guard explained. "Ms. Peterson will meet you there." The elevator ascended with barely a whisper, the only indication of movement being the digital display of floor numbers changing at a dizzying rate. Maya's stomach fluttered with a mixture of anxiety and something else, a determination not to appear intimidated by wealth and power. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. They put their pants on one leg at a time. Just like everyone else. When the doors opened, Maya stepped into a reception area that looked more like an upscale hotel lobby than an office. A poised woman with a sleek bob and impeccable attire approached immediately. "Ms. Garcia, welcome to Thornhill Innovations. I'm Melissa Peterson, Mr. Thornhill's executive assistant." Her smile was professional but warm. "Can I offer you coffee or tea before your meeting?" "Just water, please," Maya replied, her throat suddenly dry. "Of course, Mr. Thornhill is just finishing a call. He'll be with you shortly." Maya was shown to a seating area with a view of the city that took her breath away. From this height, New York looked like a miniature model, the streets forming perfect grids, the cars like toys, the people barely visible. It was beautiful, but strangely disconnected from the living, breathing city she knew. Minutes later, Melissa returned with water and an update. "Mr. Thornhill will see you now." Richard's office was even more impressive than the reception area. 3 walls of windows offered panoramic views, while the 4th displayed awards, photographs with famous figures, and what appeared to be original artwork. His desk, a massive slab of what looked like a single piece of rare wood, was positioned to command both the room and the view. Richard stood as Maya entered, coming around the desk to greet her. Today he wore a different but equally expensive-looking suit, his posture radiating the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "Ms. Garcia, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing toward a seating area near the windows. "Please make yourself comfortable." Once seated, Maya noticed something different about Richard compared to yesterday. The panic and raw emotion were gone, replaced by a careful composure. Yet there was something in his eyes, a new awareness, perhaps that hadn't been there before. "I want to begin by thanking you for what you did yesterday," Richard said, his voice measured but sincere. "The security team has confirmed your account. Those men were indeed planning to use my son to influence certain business decisions." Maya nodded, unsure how to respond to his formal gratitude. "They've been identified and appropriate measures are being taken," he continued. "The acquisition of Richardson Technologies will proceed as planned this afternoon." "I'm glad Ethan is safe," Maya said simply. Richard studied her for a moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "What I'm trying to understand, Ms. Garcia, is why you acted as you did. Most people would have called the police at best. Many would have decided it wasn't their concern at all." The question surprised Maya. It wasn't a decision, really. Ethan was in danger. He's just a child. "But you put yourself at risk. Those men could have been dangerous." Maya shrugged slightly. "I grew up in the Bronx. You learn to be careful, but you also learn that sometimes you have to stand up for others." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Where I come from, we look out for each other. It's how we survive." Something flickered across Richard's face, surprise perhaps, or recognition. "Tell me about yourself, Ms. Garcia," he said, leaning back in his chair. "How did you come to work at the community center?" Maya gave him a concise version of her history, her childhood in the Bronx, her interrupted education, her family's circumstances, and her current life. She spoke matter-of-factly, without self-pity or embellishment. "So you wanted to be a teacher," Richard summarized when she finished. "I still do," Maya affirmed. "The community center lets me work with kids, even if it's not in a classroom." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "You mentioned financial constraints forced you to leave college. Was it just tuition, or were there other factors?" The question felt invasive, but Maya answered truthfully. "My father's injury meant one less income. Someone had to help, and that someone was me." She met his gaze directly. "Family comes first." "Yes," Richard said quietly. "Family comes first." A moment of understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared values despite their vastly different circumstances. Richard stood abruptly. "I'd like you to meet someone, Ms. Garcia, if you'll follow me." Puzzled, Maya followed him out of the office and down a hallway to another set of doors. Richard knocked once, then opened them to reveal a spacious room set up like a high-end classroom, with educational materials, a small library, and various learning stations. Seated at a desk, working intently on something, was Ethan. "Dad," the boy exclaimed, looking up with a smile that brightened when he spotted Maya. "Ms. Garcia, you came. Ethan has a tutor who comes here on days when school is cancelled, or when security concerns arise," Richard explained. "After yesterday's events, I thought it best to keep him close today." Maya smiled at Ethan. "What are you working on?" "A report about Mars," he replied enthusiastically. "Did you know Mars has 2 moons? They're called Phobos and Deimos, after the Greek gods of fear and terror." "That's pretty cool," Maya said, genuinely impressed. "Are you including information about the recent NASA missions?" Ethan's eyes widened. "Do you know about those too? The tutor said I should focus on the basic facts, but the missions are the most interesting part." Maya knelt beside his desk, her initial awkwardness forgotten as they discussed Mars exploration. She pointed out aspects of his report that could be expanded and suggested resources he might find helpful. Richard watched their interaction with growing interest. There was an ease between Maya and Ethan that surprised him, an immediate connection based on genuine engagement, rather than the forced enthusiasm adults often displayed with children. After a few minutes, Richard cleared his throat. "Ethan, Ms. Garcia and I need to continue our discussion. I'll check on your progress later." "Can Ms. Garcia come back before she leaves?" Ethan asked hopefully. "I want to show her my finished report." Richard glanced at Maya, who nodded. "Of course, if she has time." Back in Richard's office, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. "You're good with him," Richard observed. "He's not usually so open with new people." "He's a great kid," Maya said. "Very bright and curious." "Yes, he is," Richard agreed, a hint of pride warming his voice. He seemed about to say more when his phone buzzed. After checking the screen, he frowned slightly. "I apologize, but there's a matter I need to address before our acquisition meeting. Would you mind waiting for a few minutes?" You're welcome to return to Ethan's study room if you'd prefer. That would be nice, Maya said, relieved at the prospect of the more relaxed environment. As Richard attended to his call, Maya spent the next half hour helping Ethan with his report, suggesting ways to organize his ideas and encouraging his enthusiasm for space exploration. By the time Richard returned, they had created an outline that had Ethan buzzing with excitement. "Dad, Ms. Garcia knows so much about Mars. She helped me make my report way better." Richard looked from his animated son to Maya with newfound curiosity. "I'm impressed, Ms. Garcia. Ethan's tutors often struggle to maintain his interest." Maya shrugged modestly. "I just listened to what he was excited about." After Ethan returned to his work, Richard led Maya back to his office. His demeanor had changed again. There was a new determination in his expression. "Ms. Garcia, Maya, if I may, I'd like to make you an offer," he said once they were seated. Maya tensed slightly. "What kind of offer?" "I believe in rewarding those who have proven their value. What you did for Ethan goes beyond any ordinary act of kindness. I'd like to show my gratitude in a tangible way." He named a sum that made Maya's breath catch. It was more money than she earned in 6 months at the community center. "That's very generous but unnecessary," she said carefully. Richard looked surprised. "You're declining?" "I didn't help Ethan for a reward, Mr. Thornhill." "Richard, please," he corrected. "And I understand that. But the fact remains that your actions potentially saved my son from a traumatic experience, and quite possibly derailed an attempt to manipulate me through him. That deserves recognition." Maya considered her response. The money would solve so many problems. Her father's mounting medical bills, the repairs needed on her parents' apartment, her brother's upcoming college application fees. Yet accepting felt wrong somehow, as if it would cheapen what she had done. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't accept payment for doing what any decent person would do," she said finally. "If you want to show gratitude, maybe consider supporting the community center instead. They're always underfunded, and the kids there could use better resources." Richard studied her with new interest. In his experience, everyone had a price. Maya's refusal contradicted everything he thought he knew about human nature. "You continue to surprise me," he admitted. "Most people in this office are looking for every opportunity to increase their compensation." "I'm not most people," Maya replied simply. "No, you certainly aren't." Richard leaned forward. "Let me propose something else. Ethan clearly responds well to you, and after yesterday's events, I'm concerned about his security. His current nanny is leaving for graduate school next month, and I've been interviewing replacements. Would you consider taking the position? The salary would be substantial, and you would have a suite in my home." Maya blinked in shock. "You want me to be Ethan's nanny?" "I prefer the term private educational consultant," Richard clarified. "You'd supervise his after-school activities, help with homework, and ensure his well-being when he's with me. You mentioned wanting to teach. This would be an opportunity to work with a bright, engaged child while earning enough to eventually return to school yourself." The offer was unexpected and overwhelming. Maya's mind raced with questions and concerns. I don't know what to say. I have commitments at the community center, my apartment lease, my cat. All negotiable," Richard countered. "The center can be compensated for finding your replacement. Lease agreements can be terminated with proper compensation, and Ethan would probably love having a cat around. He's been asking for a pet for years." "This is very sudden," Maya said, trying to gather her thoughts. "I would need time to consider." "Of course," Richard agreed. "Take a few days to think it over. In the meantime, I'd like you to spend some additional time with Ethan to see if the arrangement would work for both of you. Perhaps you could join us this weekend. I have Ethan from Friday evening through Sunday." Maya nodded slowly. "I could do that." "Excellent." Richard stood, signaling the end of their meeting. "I have to prepare for the acquisition now, but Melissa will coordinate the weekend details with you. And Maya, thank you again for what you did. Regardless of your decision about the position, I'm in your debt." As Maya was escorted back to the waiting car, her mind swirled with the implications of Richard's offer. The salary he mentioned would change her life and her family's. She could help her parents, return to school part-time, and build a more secure future. But there were complications. Moving into Richard Thornhill's world meant leaving her own behind. The community center kids needed her too, And there was something unsettling about Richard himself, the way he seemed to believe that money could solve any problem, rearrange any inconvenient circumstance. During the drive back to Washington Heights, Maya gazed out at the city passing by. New York had always been a place of stark contrasts and unlikely connections. Now, through a chance encounter and one brave decision, she found herself straddling worlds she never expected to bridge. As the car approached her neighborhood, Maya realized that whatever she decided, her life had already changed. Richard Thornhill had entered her world, and for better or worse, nothing would be quite the same again. Frank pulled up in front of her building, where several neighbors were again watching curiously. "Ms. Peterson will be in touch about the weekend arrangements," he said as he opened her door. Maya thanked him and walked toward her building, aware of the eyes following her. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage and integrity that had guided her actions with Ethan. Some things, she knew, remained constant regardless of circumstance. That evening, as Maya prepared a simple dinner in her tiny kitchen, her phone chimed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. "Ms. Garcia, this is Ethan Thornhill. Dad let me text you from his phone. Thank you for helping with my Mars report. It got an A+. I hope you can visit again soon." Maya smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. Amid all the complications and considerations, there was Ethan. Bright, curious Ethan with his Spider-Man watch and his enthusiasm for space. Whatever she decided about Richard's offer, she knew that connecting with Ethan had been worthwhile. She texted back, "Congratulations on the A+. You did all the work. I just helped organize your great ideas. See you this weekend." Across the city, in Richard's penthouse, Ethan showed the message to his father with a grin. "See, Dad? I told you she was nice. Can she really come stay with us?" Richard ruffled his son's hair affectionately. "We'll see, buddy." "I hope so." For the first time since the divorce, Richard found himself hoping for something beyond business success or material acquisition. Maya Garcia represented something his wealth couldn't buy: genuine care, uncompromised values, and a kindness that expected nothing in return. He wanted those qualities in Ethan's life, even if they challenged his own worldview in the process. The acquisition of Richardson Technologies had gone through as planned that afternoon. Richard had added another company to his empire, another victory to his record. Yet as he sat with his son, discussing Mars and mysteries and the weekend ahead, Richard Thornhill realized that the most significant development of the day might be the entry of Maya Garcia into their lives. Friday evening arrived quickly. Maya had spent the intervening days in a state of nervous anticipation, alternating between excitement about seeing Ethan again and anxiety about spending an entire weekend in Richard Thornhill's world. She had explained the situation to her supervisor at the community center, who had reacted with a mixture of concern and understanding. "Just be careful, Maya," Jose had warned. "People like Thornhill live by different rules. Don't let yourself get caught up in something you can't control." Her mother had been more practical. "Pack warm clothes, Mika. Those fancy buildings are always too cold. And remember, you're there to see if this job is right for you, not just if you're right for the job." Now, as Maya waited outside her building with a small weekend bag, she reviewed the mental list she'd made of questions to consider. Would this arrangement truly benefit Ethan? Could she maintain her own identity while working in Richard's household? Was she willing to leave the community center children who counted on her? Frank arrived precisely on time, greeting her with a friendly nod as he took her bag. "Good evening, Ms. Garcia. Mr. Thornhill and Ethan are expecting you." The Friday evening traffic was heavy, and the drive to the Upper East Side took longer than expected. Maya used the time to gaze out at the city, watching as the neighborhoods transformed from the familiar streets of her daily life to the manicured elegance of Manhattan's wealthiest district. Richard's building stood like a sentinel overlooking Central Park, its limestone facade glowing warmly in the setting sun. A uniformed doorman greeted Frank by name and ushered Maya into a marble lobby that felt more like a museum than a residence. "Ms. Garcia for Mr. Thornhill," Frank announced to the concierge, who immediately made a discreet call. "Mr. Thornhill says you can go right up," he replied, directing her to a private elevator that required a key card for access. Penthouse level. The elevator doors opened directly into an expansive foyer adorned with contemporary art and fresh flowers. Maya had barely stepped out when Ethan came bounding around the corner, his face alight with excitement. "Maya! You came!" he exclaimed, skidding to a stop just short of colliding with her. "Dad said you might change your mind." "I said no such thing," Richard corrected, appearing behind his son with a slight smile. "I merely suggested that Ms. Garcia might have other commitments to consider." He was dressed more casually than Maya had seen before, in dark jeans and a light cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The more relaxed attire softened his appearance, making him seem younger and less intimidating. "Welcome to our home," he said, extending his hand. "Ethan has been counting down the hours until your arrival." "I made a schedule of everything we can do this weekend," Ethan announced, producing a carefully written list from his pocket. "Dad said I should check with you first in case you have your own ideas." Maya smiled, touched by his enthusiasm. "I'd love to see your schedule. Maybe we can combine our ideas." Ethan beamed. "Come on, I'll show you your room and then we can have dinner." Dad ordered from Emilio's. They make the best pasta in New York. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a hallway, chattering about his week at school and the books he was currently reading. Maya glanced back at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. "Give her the full tour, Ethan. But remember what we discussed about respecting Ms. Garcia's space and time." The guest suite was larger than Maya's entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of Central Park, a king-sized bed draped in luxury linens, and an ensuite bathroom that featured both a rainfall shower and a soaking tub. Fresh flowers sat on a side table beside a basket of expensive-looking toiletries. "Dad had Ms. Peterson get everything ready for you," Ethan explained proudly. "Is it okay? Do you like it?" "It's beautiful," Maya assured him, setting her modest bag on a bench that probably cost more than all her furniture combined. "My room is right down the hall," Ethan continued. "Want to see it? I cleaned it specially for your visit." Ethan's bedroom reflected his personality perfectly, one part organized study space with bookshelves and a desk, one part typical 8-year-old boy with space posters, Lego constructions, and a collection of science-themed toys. Unlike many privileged children Maya had encountered, Ethan's room wasn't overwhelmed with electronics or expensive gadgets. Instead, it contained thoughtfully chosen items that nurtured his curiosity and imagination. "This is a great room," Maya said sincerely. "I love your space models." Ethan proudly showed her a detailed model of the Mars rover he had built with his father. "Dad and I work on projects together every other weekend. He says it's better than just buying things at the store." The comment surprised Maya. It didn't align with her preconceived image of Richard as a distant, work-obsessed father who compensated for his absence with expensive gifts. The tour continued through the penthouse, which managed to be simultaneously grand and comfortable. The main living area featured panoramic views, contemporary furniture that invited relaxation, and subtle technological integration. The kitchen was a chef's dream, though Ethan confided that Richard rarely cooked beyond breakfast. "Dad makes really good pancakes, though," he added loyally. "Maybe he'll make some tomorrow if you ask." Dinner was served in a casual dining area adjacent to the kitchen. The pasta was indeed excellent, and the conversation flowed more easily than Maya had anticipated. Richard asked thoughtful questions about her work at the community center, listening attentively to her descriptions of the programs and the children she worked with. "It sounds like you've created something special with the reading corner," he observed. Maya nodded. "Books were my escape when I was growing up. I wanted to give the kids that same opportunity, a place where they could travel anywhere through stories." "Like my Mars report," Ethan chimed in. "I learned all about Mars without ever leaving Earth." "Exactly," Maya agreed. "That's the magic of reading." As the evening progressed, Maya found herself gradually relaxing. Richard in his home environment was different from Richard the CEO, more attentive, more present, occasionally even displaying a dry wit that made Ethan giggle and Maya smile despite herself. After dinner, they gathered in the living room for a board game that Ethan insisted was family tradition for Friday nights. To Maya's surprise, Richard participated fully, setting aside his phone and engaging in the good-natured competition with genuine enjoyment. "Dad gets super competitive," Ethan whispered to Maya as Richard contemplated his move. "But I still beat him sometimes." I heard that, Richard replied without looking up from the board, and I'll have you know that I let you win occasionally to build your confidence. Sure. Dad, Ethan said with an exaggerated wink at Maya that made her laugh out loud. The sound of her laughter seemed to catch Richard's attention. He glanced up, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before he returned to the game. By the time Ethan went to bed, Maya had begun to revise some of her assumptions about the Thornhills. The relationship between father and son was closer than she had expected, with routines and inside jokes that spoke of genuine connection despite Richard's demanding career. After tucking Ethan in, a privilege he solemnly invited her to share with his father, Maya joined Richard on the terrace overlooking the park. The autumn night was cool but clear, the city lights creating a glittering panorama below them. "Wine?" Richard offered, holding up a bottle. "Just a little." "Thank you," Maya replied, accepting a glass and taking a seat in one of the comfortable outdoor chairs. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, each absorbing the view and the relative quiet 9 stories above the bustling city. "He likes you," Richard said finally. "More than that, he connects with you. That's rare for Ethan." Maya sipped her wine, considering her response. "He's an exceptional child. Very thoughtful and curious." "Yes, he is," Richard agreed, pride evident in his voice. "His mother and I worry sometimes that he's too serious, too mature for his age. Tonight was the most I've heard him laugh in weeks." "Children respond to genuine interest," Maya said. "Ethan can tell when adults are really listening versus just waiting for their turn to speak." Richard nodded slowly, a skill many adults could stand to develop. He paused, swirling the wine in his glass. "You've learned a lot about us tonight, but I realize I still know very little about you. Tell me more about your family." Maya spoke about her parents, their immigration from Mexico before she was born, their tireless work ethic, their dreams for their children. She described her father's current health struggles, her mother's double shifts, her younger brother's determination to become the first in their family to graduate from college. Richard listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed a surprising understanding of the challenges faced by families like hers. "Your parents sound like remarkable people," he said when she finished. "They've raised a daughter to be proud of." The compliment, delivered with quiet sincerity, caught Maya off guard. "Thank you," she said simply. "Have you given any more thought to my offer?" Richard asked after another comfortable silence. "I'm thinking about it this weekend," Maya replied honestly. "There are many factors to consider." Richard nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I believe you would be good for Ethan. Not just as an educational influence, but as someone who brings different perspectives and values to his life." "And what about you, Richard?" Maya asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. "Would my different perspectives and values be welcome in your household, beyond what they offer Ethan?" Richard considered the question seriously. "I'd like to think so. Recent events have challenged some of my assumptions." He looked out at the city, his expression thoughtful. "Success in business often comes from recognizing when your current approach isn't working. Perhaps the same is true in life." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they finished their wine. Richard shared stories about Ethan's early years, and Maya told him about some of the more amusing incidents at the community center. By the time they said goodnight, a tentative bridge had formed between their very different worlds. Saturday dawned bright and clear. True to Ethan's prediction, Richard made pancakes for breakfast, revealing an unexpected domestic competence as he flipped perfect golden discs onto their plates. "The secret," he confided to Maya as he worked, "is letting the batter rest before cooking. My grandmother taught me that when I was about Ethan's age." The mention of his grandmother, a humanizing detail that suggested Richard hadn't always lived in luxury, intrigued Maya. But before she could ask more, Ethan launched into an excited description of their planned visit to the American Museum of Natural History. The day unfolded with a natural rhythm that surprised Maya with its ease. At the museum, Ethan's enthusiasm was contagious as he led them from exhibit to exhibit, his knowledge impressive for his age. Richard, contrary to Maya's expectations, didn't check his phone constantly or seem distracted by business concerns. Instead, he engaged fully with his son, asking questions and adding information that revealed his own considerable knowledge of science and history. Maya observed their interaction with growing curiosity. The Richard Thornhill who patiently explained the evolution of hominid species to his son was a far cry from the commanding CEO she had first met. Here was a father who clearly valued learning and took genuine pleasure in nurturing his son's intellectual development. After the museum, they had lunch at a casual cafe where Richard was greeted by name but treated without fuss. The afternoon included a walk through Central Park, ice cream from a vendor, and an impromptu soccer game when they encountered a group of children playing on a field. To Maya's surprise, Richard rolled up his sleeves and joined in, displaying unexpected athletic skill and a competitive spirit that made Ethan cheer and Maya laugh. When Richard scored a goal, he high-fived Ethan with boyish exuberance that transformed his usually serious face. Dad was captain of his soccer team in college, Ethan informed Maya proudly as they watched Richard chat with one of the other parents. He has trophies and everything. By the time they returned to the penthouse that evening, Maya felt as if she had glimpsed a different man beneath Richard's polished exterior, a man with passions and skills beyond the boardroom, capable of joy and spontaneity when freed from professional constraints. Dinner was takeout from a neighborhood Thai restaurant, eaten at the kitchen island rather than the dining table. Ethan, tired but happy, recounted his favorite parts of the day while Richard listened with evident pleasure in his son's excitement. After Ethan went to bed, Maya found herself alone with Richard again, this time in the living room where soft jazz played from hidden speakers. "Thank you for today," she said, curling up in a corner of the sofa. "Ethan had a wonderful time." "So did I," Richard admitted, loosening his watch and setting it on the coffee table. "It's been too long since I took a full day away from work when Ethan is with me. Usually I'm checking emails or taking calls even during our weekends. What was different about today?" Maya asked, genuinely curious. Richard considered the question. "You were here," he said finally. "Having you with us, it created a different dynamic. I felt more accountable, perhaps, more aware of how I was spending our time." The admission seemed to surprise Richard himself. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Maya had noticed appeared when he was processing something unexpected. "You know, after Charlotte and I divorced, I threw myself into work even more than before," he continued, his voice reflective, partially to escape the sense of failure, partially because business success was something I could control in a way that relationships seemed not to be. Maya nodded, understanding more than he might realize. "It's easier to measure success in business. There are clear metrics, profit margins, acquisitions, stock prices. Relationships are messier." "Exactly," Richard agreed, looking at her with new appreciation. "You can't quantify them or optimize them like business strategies. But they're what matter in the end," Maya said quietly. "No one looks back at the end of their life and wishes they'd spent more time at the office." Richard's expression turned thoughtful. "My father did. He was so focused on building his construction company that he missed most of my childhood. When he became ill, I was already in college. We had a few years to try to connect before he—" Richard paused, choosing his words carefully. "Before he passed. It wasn't enough time to bridge the gap. Is that why you make pancakes and play soccer and build models with Ethan?" Maya asked gently. "To create a different pattern?" Richard looked surprised, then nodded slowly. "I suppose it is. I want him to have memories of me as a father, not just as a provider." He smiled ruefully. "Though I clearly still struggle with balance, or I wouldn't have needed today's reminder of what I've been missing." The conversation continued late into the evening, touching on childhood memories, dreams deferred, and the unexpected paths their lives had taken. Maya found herself sharing thoughts and feelings she rarely expressed, drawn out by Richard's genuine interest and surprising vulnerability. When they finally said goodnight, Maya lay awake in the luxurious guest bed, her mind processing the day's revelations. Richard Thornhill was more complex than she had initially believed, a man divided between the ruthless efficiency required by his business empire and the warmth and connection he clearly craved in his personal life. As she drifted toward sleep, Maya wondered if perhaps the position Richard had offered might be more than just a job. Perhaps it was also an opportunity to help bridge the gap between those two worlds. not just for Ethan's benefit, but for Richard's as well. On Sunday morning, as Maya packed her bag to return home, Ethan appeared in her doorway with a gift, a small, carefully wrapped package. "I made this for you," he said, presenting it with shy pride. Inside was a handmade bookmark featuring a watercolor painting of Mars, complete with tiny rovers on its surface. "It's beautiful, Ethan," Maya said, genuinely touched. "I'll use it every day." "So you'll come back?" he asked hopefully. "Dad says it's up to you, but we both want you to." Looking into his earnest young face, Maya felt the weight of the decision before her. This weekend had shown her that there was more to the Thornhills than wealth and privilege. There was also love, curiosity, and the universal desire for connection. Later, as Frank drove her back to Washington Heights, Maya watched the city pass by, the bookmark carefully tucked into her favorite novel. The weekend had answered some questions but raised others. Could she truly bridge these two worlds? And if she did, which world would ultimately claim her heart? Maya spent the next week in a state of thoughtful deliberation. During the day, she went about her duties at the community center with her usual dedication, but her mind frequently drifted to the Thornhills, to Ethan's enthusiastic questions, and Richard's surprising complexity. On Wednesday evening, she invited her mother over for dinner to discuss the opportunity that lay before her. Rosa Garcia listened attentively as Maya described the weekend, the job offer, and her conflicting feelings about accepting it. It would mean leaving the center. "Mommy," Maya explained as they sat at her small kitchen table, sharing the chicken enchiladas Rosa had insisted on bringing. "Those kids count on me." Rosa nodded understandingly. "And you feel responsible for them." "Yes, but this position would pay enough that I could help you and Papi more, maybe even go back to school part-time," Maya sighed, pushing a piece of chicken around her plate. "And then there's Ethan. He's such a special kid, Mommy, smart and kind, but he needs someone who sees him for who he is, not just as Richard Thornhill's son." "And the father?" Rosa asked perceptively. "What is he like?" Maya hesitated. "Complicated. Different than I expected. At work he's exactly what you'd imagine. Commanding, confident, used to getting his way. But with Ethan he's softer. He tries hard to be a good father even if he doesn't always know how." Rosa studied her daughter's face. "And how do you feel when you're with them?" "Like I'm making a difference," Maya admitted. "Like I belong in a way I didn't expect." Her mother reached across the table to take her hand. "Mija, all your life you've put others first. Your family, the children at the center. Maybe this is an opportunity to do something that serves both others and yourself. But what about my obligations? My commitments? The community center existed before you came, and it will continue after you go," Rosa said gently. "Other dedicated people will step up. As for your family, we want what's best for you. Your father says the same." Maya smiled, thinking of her father's daily phone calls since she'd told him about the offer. His pride in her was evident, though he carefully avoided pressuring her one way or the other. "There's something else," Maya said hesitantly. "Living in their world. I'm afraid of losing myself, of forgetting where I came from." Rosa's laugh was warm and knowing. "Oh, my Maya, that is the least of my worries. Your roots are too deep, your heart too true. You won't forget. You'll bring your world to theirs. That's the gift you have always had." After her mother left, Maya stood at her fire escape looking out at the familiar neighborhood lights. Rosa's confidence had clarified something important. This wasn't just about a job or a salary. It was about bridging worlds, about bringing her perspective and values into Ethan's life, and perhaps Richard's as well. The next morning, Maya called Richard's office and asked to speak with him. "Maya," his voice came through the line, warmly professional. "I was hoping to hear from you." "I've made my decision," she said, her voice steady with newfound certainty. "I'd like to accept the position, but I have some conditions." There was a brief pause before Richard replied, "I'm listening. First, I'll need 2 weeks to properly transition my responsibilities at the community center. The children deserve a proper goodbye, and I want to help train whoever replaces me." "Of course," Richard agreed readily. "What else?" "I'd like 1 day a week to volunteer at a community center of my choosing. It's important to me to stay connected to that work." "That seems reasonable." "And I want to be able to bring Ethan to experience different parts of the city, not just museums and upscale neighborhoods, but community events, cultural celebrations, places where he can see the diversity and vibrancy of New York. With appropriate security considerations, I have no objection, Richard said. Is there anything else? Maya took a deep breath. Yes, I need to know that you respect my approach to education and childcare, even when it differs from what you might expect. I won't be a typical Upper East Side nanny, Richard. That's not who I am or what Ethan needs. The line was quiet for a moment. Maya, Richard finally said, his voice softer than before, it's precisely because you aren't typical that I want you in this role. I trust your judgment with Ethan. You've already proven that your instincts where he's concerned are excellent. Relief washed over Maya. Then I accept. Welcome to the family. Maya, Richard said, and something in his tone made the phrase feel like more than a mere pleasantry. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Richard sent his legal team to handle the termination of Maya's lease, arranging for her to receive the full security deposit despite the early departure. Melissa coordinated the logistics of moving Maya's modest belongings to the penthouse and helped set up her new suite to accommodate Frida the cat, who would be joining her. At the community center, Maya worked diligently to document her programs and train her replacement, a bright college student named Zoe, who shared her passion for literacy and child development. The children were sad to see her go, but excited when she promised class trips to museums and parks under her guidance in her new role. On her last day, Jose surprised her with a farewell party. The children presented her with a handmade book containing their stories and drawings, while the staff gave her a silver pendant in the shape of an open book. You're going to change that kid's life, Jose told her as they shared a final cup of coffee in the staff room. Just don't let them change you. Maya smiled, touching the pendant at her throat. Not a chance. You all are coming with me. Right here, she said, patting her heart. The Monday after she finished at the community center, Maya moved into the Thornhill penthouse. Richard was in Tokyo on business, but Ethan was there with his weekday caregiver, an older woman named Mrs. Foster, who would continue to help during the transition. Maya! Ethan exclaimed when she arrived, bouncing with excitement. Dad said to tell you that your rooms are all ready, and you can change anything you don't like. And he got special food for Frida and a cat tree and toys and— Slow down, Ethan, Mrs. Foster said with a kind smile. Let Ms. Garcia at least get through the door. To Maya's surprise, her suite had been transformed since her weekend stay. The formerly neutral space now featured colorful throw pillows, framed photographs of Central Park in different seasons, and a carefully curated bookshelf filled with titles ranging from educational theory to her favorite novels, information Richard must have gathered from her conversation with Ethan. A separate sitting room had been converted into a small office with a desk, comfortable reading chair, and a state-of-the-art laptop. A note on the desk, handwritten on heavy stationery, read simply, "To New Beginnings." Perhaps the most touching addition was a custom-built window seat with a view of the park, the perfect spot for reading or reflection. Beside it stood an elegant cat tree and play area for Frida, who was currently exploring her new domain with typical feline curiosity. Do you like it? Ethan asked anxiously, hovering in the doorway. Dad and I picked everything out before he left for Japan. It's perfect, Maya assured him, genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness of the preparations. The first few weeks established a comfortable routine. Maya accompanied Ethan to and from school, supervised homework, and planned educational activities that supplemented his classroom learning. Evenings were spent reading together, playing games, or working on projects that engaged Ethan's scientific curiosity. Richard called daily from Tokyo, speaking first with Ethan and then briefly with Maya to check on their adjustment. His concern seemed genuine, his interest in the details of their days surprising in its specificity. You've already got him reading more challenging books, Richard observed during one call, after Ethan had mentioned their current chapter book. His teacher mentioned it during our conference call yesterday. He was ready for more complexity, Maya explained. Children often rise to meet expectations when they're supported properly. You're good for him, Richard said simply. Thank you. By the time Richard returned from his business trip, Maya and Ethan had developed their own comfortable dynamic. She had introduced him to her favorite childhood games, taught him to make simple Mexican dishes under her supervision, and established a reading hour every evening that had quickly become Ethan's favorite time of day. Richard arrived home late on a Friday night after Ethan was already asleep. Maya was curled up in her window seat with a book when a soft knock came at her door. "I didn't want to wait until morning to say hello," Richard explained when she opened it, looking tired but pleased to be home. "How have things been?" They moved to the kitchen where Maya made tea, while giving Richard a detailed update on Ethan's activities and progress. Richard listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and smiling at stories of his son's achievements. "And how about you?" he asked when she finished. "Are you settling in all right?" "Better than I expected," Maya admitted. "Ethan makes it easy." "And the rest of it?" "The change in everything?" Maya considered the question. "It's an adjustment. Sometimes I feel like I've stepped into someone else's life. But then Ethan asks a question or shares something important, and I remember why I'm here." Richard nodded understandingly. "Transitions take time. For what it's worth, Ethan's teacher sent a glowing email about the positive changes she's seen in just these few weeks. More engagement, more confidence, more enthusiasm for learning." Pride warmed Maya's chest. "He's capable of so much. He just needs the right encouragement." "Something you excel at providing," Richard observed, studying her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see more than she intended to reveal. "I'm glad you're here, Maya, for Ethan, of course, but also," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "also for the perspective you bring to our lives." The sincerity in his voice created a moment of connection that lingered as they said goodnight and went to their separate rooms. Over the following months, their lives settled into a pattern that balanced structure and spontaneity. Weekdays were organized around Ethan's school and extracurricular activities, with Maya introducing new learning experiences that often took them to different parts of the city. Weekends, when Ethan was with Charlotte, allowed Maya time for her volunteer work and family visits, while weekends with Richard often included outings that increasingly involved all three of them. Richard's business still demanded much of his time, but Maya noticed subtle changes in his priorities. He began coming home earlier on nights when Ethan was with him, joining them for dinner and the bedtime routine. He scheduled important meetings around Ethan's school events and rarely missed the science demonstrations or book reports that Maya encouraged Ethan to share with his father. Spring arrived, bringing with it Ethan's school science fair. His project, a sophisticated model of Mars's terrain created with Richard's engineering input and Maya's artistic guidance, won first prize. The photo of the three of them with Ethan's trophy found a place of honor on Richard's desk at work and on the family photo wall in the penthouse. In late April, as Maya and Ethan worked on planting a small container garden on the penthouse terrace, Richard emerged from his home office with an unusual request. "I need a favor," he said, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "There's a charity gala next weekend, the annual fundraiser for New York Children's Hospital. I'm on the board, so I can't miss it, but my usual +1 is unavailable. Would you consider accompanying me?" Maya looked up from the pot of soil she was helping Ethan fill. "Me at a charity gala? It's for a good cause," Richard added quickly. "The hospital provides medical care for children regardless of their family's ability to pay." "It's fancy," Ethan chimed in helpfully. "Dad always wears his tuxedo. And there's dancing and really good desserts." Maya hesitated. She had successfully adapted to many aspects of the Thornhills' life, but a high society charity event was beyond her experience. "I wouldn't know how to act at something like that. And I certainly don't have anything appropriate to wear." "Melissa can help with the outfit," Richard said, waving away that concern. "And as for how to act, just be yourself. That's all anyone needs to do." There was something in his expression, a mixture of hope and vulnerability, that made refusal difficult. "All right," she agreed finally. "For the Children's Hospital." Richard's smile was surprisingly boyish. "Excellent. Melissa will coordinate everything." The following week brought a flurry of preparations. True to Richard's word, Melissa arranged for a stylist to visit with a selection of designer gowns. After much deliberation, Maya chose a deep emerald dress that was elegant without being ostentatious, with a silhouette that made her feel confident rather than costume. On the night of the gala, As Maya stood in her room putting the finishing touches on her appearance, a knock came at the door. Ethan stood there in pajamas, his eyes widening as he took in her transformation. "Wow," he breathed. "You look like a princess from a story." Maya smiled, kneeling to his level despite the dress. "Thank you, but I'm still just Maya." "I know," he said seriously. "That's why Dad likes you so much. Because you're always yourself." Before Maya could respond to this unexpected observation, Richard appeared in the hallway behind his son. He too paused at the sight of her, something shifting in his expression. "You look beautiful, Maya," he said simply. The gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Its grand spaces transformed for the evening with elegant lighting, floral arrangements, and tables set for New York's wealthiest and most influential citizens. As Richard guided her through the crowd, his hand a steady presence at the small of her back, Maya felt the curious gazes of those who recognized him but couldn't place her. Richard Thornhill. A woman in diamonds approached them, air-kissing Richard's cheek. "It's been too long. And who is your lovely friend?" "Emily, this is Maya Garcia," Richard said smoothly. "Maya, Emily Bradford chairs the hospital's pediatric research initiative." "Maya," Emily repeated, studying her with undisguised curiosity. "And how do you two know each other?" Before Richard could answer, Maya spoke up. "I work with Richard's son, Ethan. I'm his educational consultant." "How interesting," Emily replied, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "Richard, you must introduce Maya to Sheila Montgomery. She's always complaining about her children's tutors." As the evening progressed, Maya encountered varying reactions to her presence. Some, like Emily, barely concealed their assessment that she didn't belong in their circle. Others were genuinely interested in her background and her work with Ethan. Richard remained attentive throughout, subtly steering her away from the most judgmental guests and introducing her to those he thought she might connect with. During dinner, seated at a table with hospital administrators and major donors, Maya found her voice in a discussion about educational access for long-term pediatric patients. "The problem isn't just providing materials," she explained, warming to a topic she cared deeply about. "It's creating an environment where learning feels relevant and engaging, despite their circumstances. These children have already lost so much control over their lives. Education should be an area where they can exercise choice and experience success." Dr. James Wilson, the hospital's chief of pediatrics, leaned forward with interest. "That's precisely the challenge we've been facing with our program. Would you be willing to share some of your specific approaches? Perhaps visit our education center." "I'd be honored," Maya replied sincerely. Across the table, Richard watched this exchange with an expression Maya couldn't quite interpret, something between pride and a more complex emotion she couldn't name. After dinner came dancing. Richard led her onto the floor with practiced ease, his hand warm against hers, his other hand resting lightly at her waist. "You're full of surprises." "Mr. Thornhill," Maya commented as they moved smoothly among the other couples. "I wouldn't have guessed you enjoyed dancing." "Another skill from my grandmother," Richard admitted. "She insisted proper gentlemen should know how to dance. I complained bitterly at the time, but now I'm grateful. Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Richard said softly. "She raised me after my mother left. Worked as a school librarian, lived modestly but made sure I had everything I truly needed. She would have liked you very much, Maya." The personal revelation offered so naturally in this unexpected setting touched Maya deeply. "I wish I could have met her." "So do I," Richard said, his voice sincere. "She taught me what really matters in life, though I've often lost sight of those lessons in pursuit of success." "What brought you back to them?" Maya asked, genuinely curious. Richard's gaze met hers directly. "Ethan, and more recently, you." The simple statement hung between them as they continued to dance, creating a moment of connection that transcended their disparate backgrounds and the glittering, superficial world surrounding them. Later that night, as they drove home through the quiet streets of Manhattan, Maya reflected on the evening. "Thank you for asking me to come," she said. "It was educational," Richard chuckled. "That's one word for it. You handled Emily Bradford better than most Fortune 500 CEOs I know." "I've dealt with tougher audiences," Maya replied with a smile. Try keeping 20 first graders engaged during a power outage. You did more than survive tonight. Maya, you made an impression. Dr. Wilson called me aside before we left to tell me how impressed he was with your insights about their education program. It's something I care about, Maya said simply. That's what makes you extraordinary, Richard observed. Your genuine concern for others. It's rare in my world. Perhaps your world needs more people who care, Maya suggested gently. Richard was quiet for a moment. Perhaps it does, he agreed finally. Perhaps that's exactly what it needs. As the car pulled up to their building, Maya realized something had shifted between them. The lines that defined their relationship, employer and employee, different worlds, different perspectives, had begun to blur into something more complex and potentially more meaningful. What that might become, she wasn't yet sure. But as Richard offered his hand to help her from the car, his touch lingering just a moment longer than necessary, Maya knew that the bridges between their worlds were growing stronger with each passing. Summer descended on New York City, bringing sweltering heat that transformed the concrete metropolis into an urban sauna. Central Park became an oasis of relative coolness, its trees offering precious shade to the city's residents. For Maya, who had now been with the Thornhills for nearly 6 months, the summer brought new rhythms and unexpected challenges. Ethan's school year had ended triumphantly, with academic honors and a special commendation for his science project on Mars exploration. The summer schedule Maya had developed for him balanced enrichment activities, physical recreation, and the unstructured free time that she believed was essential for a child's development. Their days often began with breakfast on the terrace, followed by educational outings across the city, some to expected destinations like museums and libraries, others to community gardens, ethnic festivals, or local workshops, where Ethan could experience the diversity that made New York unique. Richard had kept his word about allowing these varied experiences, providing security as needed, but never restricting Maya's creative approach to Ethan's education. On this particular Thursday morning in July, Maya sat in her office reviewing plans for an upcoming trip to the Bronx Zoo when her phone buzzed with a message from Richard. Need to speak with you. My office, 2 p.m.? The formal tone was unusual. Typically, Richard's messages about Ethan were conversational, often including questions about their activities or comments about his son's latest enthusiasms. This brevity suggested something more serious. Maya replied with a simple confirmation and tried to focus on her work, but worry nagged at her. Had she overstepped in some way? Was there a problem with Ethan that she had missed? At precisely 2 p.m., Maya arrived at Richard's office, dressed in the more professional attire she wore for school meetings and official appointments. Melissa greeted her with a warm smile that eased her concerns slightly. "He's waiting for you," she said, gesturing toward the familiar double doors. Richard was standing at the windows when Maya entered, his posture tense, his reflection in the glass revealing a troubled expression that cleared somewhat when he turned to greet her. "Thank you for coming." "Maya," he said, motioning toward the seating area they typically used for their discussions. "I apologize for the cryptic message. Something has come up that I needed to discuss with you in person, away from the penthouse." Maya sat, her concern returning. "Is everything all right?" "Is Ethan?" "Ethan is fine," Richard assured her quickly. "This isn't about his well-being exactly, though it does involve him." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "I received a call from Charlotte this morning. She's been offered a position as head of cardiology at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston." "That's a prestigious appointment," Maya observed, knowing from conversations with Ethan that his mother was a highly respected cardiologist. "It is," Richard agreed. "Under normal circumstances, I would support her career advancement without reservation. The complication is that she wants to take Ethan with her." Maya felt her heart sink. "Permanently?" Richard nodded, his expression grim. "She's proposing to modify our custody arrangement. Instead of our current schedule, Ethan would live primarily with her in Boston, with me getting extended holidays and most of the summer." The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. After 6 months of building a relationship with Ethan, of becoming part of his daily life, the thought of his absence created an ache she hadn't anticipated. Yet she kept her expression composed, focusing on the practical aspects. "What does the custody agreement allow?" It would require court approval to modify the terms, Richard explained. Charlotte and I have joint physical custody, which was possible because we both live in the same city. A move of this magnitude changes everything. And what do you want to do? Maya asked carefully. Richard ran a hand through his hair, the familiar gesture revealing his inner turmoil. Fight it, of course. Ethan's life is here. His school, his friends, his routines. He looked directly at Maya. You. The simple addition of that last word carried unexpected weight. Maya took a moment before responding. Have you discussed this with Ethan? Does he know about the possibility? Not yet. Charlotte wanted to speak with me first, to see if we could reach an agreement without involving him. She's giving me time to consider my response. Maya nodded thoughtfully. That was considerate of her. Charlotte is many things, but she's always been a good mother, Richard acknowledged. She believes this move would benefit Ethan. Better schools in Boston, proximity to her parents who adore him, a house with a yard instead of city living. But you disagree? Richard stood, moving restlessly around the office. I believe stability is crucial for children. Ethan has thrived this past year, especially since you came into our lives. His academic performance has improved. His confidence has grown. He's more willing to try new things. He stopped, facing Maya directly. I don't want to lose that. I don't want him to lose you. The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within Maya. Over the months, her relationship with Richard had evolved from formal employer-employee dynamics to something more collaborative, more personal. They had developed a mutual respect that sometimes felt like it might evolve into something deeper, though neither had acknowledged it openly. This isn't just about my role in Ethan's life, Maya said gently. It's about yours. You've become more present, more engaged. You've built something special with him. With your guidance, Richard admitted, you helped me see what I was missing, what he needed from me beyond material support. Maya considered her next words carefully. What does your lawyer advise? That I have a strong case for maintaining the current arrangement, given Ethan's established life here and my consistent involvement. Richard's expression hardened slightly. I built my career winning difficult battles. Maya, I don't intend to lose the one that matters most. Maya recognized the determined businessman emerging, the strategic thinker, accustomed to overcoming obstacles through superior resources and sheer force of will. While she admired his commitment to Ethan, she worried about the impact of a bitter custody battle on everyone involved. May I speak freely? She asked. Richard nodded. Always. A legal battle between you and Charlotte would be devastating for Ethan, regardless of the outcome. He loves you both. Being forced to choose or feeling responsible for your conflict would cause lasting harm. So you think I should simply accept losing regular contact with my son? Richard's voice held an edge of frustration. No, Maya replied calmly. I think you should find a third path, one that prioritizes Ethan's well-being and preserves his relationships with both his parents. That might require compromise, creativity, and putting aside the instinct to win at all costs. Richard was silent for a long moment, absorbing her words. Then, surprisingly, he smiled, a small, rueful acknowledgement. Once again, you cut through to what matters. Maya, it's one of the qualities I've come to... He paused, then continued. Value most about you. The subtle shift in his intended wording wasn't lost on Maya, but she maintained her focus on the issue at hand. What if you suggested a trial period? Perhaps Ethan could spend the first semester in Boston, with frequent visits from you, and return to New York for the second semester. That would allow him to experience both options before any permanent decisions are made. Richard considered this, a balanced approach that puts Ethan's experience at the center. Charlotte might be receptive to that, and it demonstrates your willingness to consider what might be best for Ethan, even at personal cost to yourself, Maya added. That matters in these situations. Richard nodded slowly, his expression softening. Thank you, Maya, for your perspective and for caring so deeply about Ethan's welfare. He hesitated, then added more quietly, This would affect you too, you know. If Ethan moves to Boston even temporarily, the implication hung in the air between them. Maya's position in the household was centered around Ethan. Without him, her role became uncertain. We don't need to resolve everything today, Maya said, rising from her seat. Focus on finding common ground with Charlotte first. The rest will follow. As she turned to leave, Richard spoke again. Maya, whatever happens with this situation, I want you to know that your place in our lives, in my life, extends beyond your work with Ethan. The statement, delivered with quiet intensity, lingered in Maya's mind as she left the office and returned to the penthouse. There she found Ethan engrossed in a book from their latest library visit, blissfully unaware of the adult complications swirling around his future. Over the next 2 weeks, Richard engaged in careful negotiations with Charlotte. Maya maintained her usual routine with Ethan, though each shared activity now carried a poignant awareness that their time together might be limited. She found herself mentally cataloguing moments, Ethan's laughter during their water balloon fight on the terrace, his concentration as they built a model rocket together, his thoughtful questions during their nightly reading sessions, storing them like treasures against the possibility of his absence. Richard kept her informed of the discussions, sometimes calling late in the evening to share developments or seek her input on specific points. These conversations often extended beyond the custody issue, touching on their respective days, shared observations about Ethan, and increasingly, personal reflections and memories. One evening, as July's heat finally broke with a thunderstorm that lashed the penthouse windows, Richard returned from a dinner meeting with Charlotte, looking both relieved and melancholy. We've reached an agreement, he told Maya, joining her in the living room, where she was preparing materials for the following day's activities. Ethan will stay in Boston for the fall semester, with me visiting every other weekend. He'll return to New York for spring, and we'll reassess based on his adjustment and preferences. That sounds reasonable, Maya said, studying Richard's expression. How do you feel about it? Conflicted, he admitted. Rationally, I know it's a fair compromise. Emotionally, he trailed off, gazing out at the rain-slicked city. You'll miss him, Maya supplied softly. Every day, Richard agreed. But your approach was right, as usual. When I focused on what would give Ethan the best experience, rather than what I wanted, Charlotte and I found common ground. When will you tell him? This weekend. Charlotte is coming over for brunch on Sunday so we can explain it together. Richard turned to face Maya directly. I'd like you to be there too, if you're willing. So Ethan will have questions about how this affects his relationship with you. Of course, Maya agreed. I want to support him through this transition. Richard moved closer, his expression serious. This also raises questions about your position here. With Ethan away for several months, your role will necessarily change. Maya had been preparing for this discussion since their meeting in his office. I understand. If you prefer to suspend our arrangement during that time— No, Richard interrupted firmly. That's not at all what I want. In fact, I was hoping you might consider traveling with me to Boston for some of my visits. Ethan will need continuity, familiar faces, routines he can count on even as his environment changes. The suggestion took Maya by surprise. You want me to continue working with Ethan long distance? Working with Ethan, yes, but also— Richard hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. Maya, these past months have shown me what's been missing in my life, not just in my relationship with Ethan, but in my understanding of what truly matters. You've become important to me, not just as Ethan's caregiver, but as someone I've come to depend on, someone whose perspective I value and whose company I enjoy. The thunder rumbled outside, underlining the gravity of the moment. Maya felt her heart quicken as Richard continued. I'm not expressing this well. What I'm trying to say is that I hope you'll remain part of our lives, part of my life, regardless of the logistical changes ahead. Maya regarded him thoughtfully, weighing the complexity of what he was suggesting. Their relationship had evolved over the months into something that defied simple categorization, more than employer and employee, not quite friends in the conventional sense, but with an undeniable connection that had grown increasingly personal. Richard, she began carefully, I care deeply about Ethan, and I'm committed to supporting him through this transition. As for us, she paused, organizing her thoughts. We come from very different worlds. Sometimes I still feel like a visitor in yours, and yet you navigate it with remarkable grace, Richard observed. While helping me see aspects of it I've been blind to for years. And you've opened doors for me I never imagined crossing, Maya acknowledged. My work with Dr. Wilson's hospital program, My evening classes that you encouraged me to pursue, those opportunities have meant a great deal to me. We've built something meaningful together, Richard said quietly. I don't want to lose that because circumstances are changing. Before Maya could respond, a flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed immediately by a tremendous crack of thunder that made the building seem to shudder. Seconds later, Ethan appeared in the doorway, clutching his favorite book and looking anxious. The storm woke me up, he explained, eyes wide. Can I stay out here with you guys for a little while? The adult conversation immediately shifted to accommodate his needs. Richard and Maya exchanged a look that acknowledged their discussion would continue later, as they welcomed Ethan between them on the sofa. Perfect timing for a story, Maya suggested, making space for him beside her. Your dad and I were just talking about how thunder is really just the sound of clouds bumping into each other. That's not scientifically accurate, Ethan pointed out, already distracted from his fear. Thunder is actually the sound of rapidly heated air expanding after lightning. Richard laughed, ruffling his son's hair. He gets his precision from his mother. The three of them sat together as the storm continued, Ethan gradually relaxing as they took turns reading from his book. Maya was acutely aware of the tableau they created, a family-like unit, formed not by biology or convention, but by choice and circumstance. Whatever lay ahead for them individually, this moment held a perfect unity that transcended their differences and uncertainties. Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, ideal weather for the difficult conversation ahead. Charlotte Thornhill arrived precisely at 11, her elegant appearance and confident demeanor immediately explaining aspects of Ethan's personality that didn't come from Richard. Maya had met her previously at school events, but their interactions had been brief and formal. Today, as Maya helped prepare brunch in the kitchen, she observed the cordial but complex dynamic between the former spouses with new understanding. Maya, Charlotte was just asking about your background in education, Richard said, including her in their conversation. Informal rather than traditional, Maya explained, placing a platter of fruit on the table. I was studying elementary education when family circumstances required me to leave college. The community center work and now my position with Ethan have been practical applications of that interest, and I've recently returned to evening classes to complete my degree. Charlotte nodded appreciatively. Richard speaks highly of your influence on Ethan. His teachers have noted significant improvements in both his academic performance and his social confidence. Ethan is naturally curious and empathetic, Maya replied. My role has simply been to nurture those qualities. You're too modest, Richard interjected. You've revolutionized his educational experience. Charlotte gave Richard a knowing look that Maya couldn't quite interpret. Well, I'm grateful for your positive impact on my son. I hope we can find ways to maintain that influence, even with the geographical change ahead. Before Maya could respond, Ethan entered the kitchen, immediately sensing the unusual gathering of the important adults in his life. Are we having a special brunch? He asked, his perceptiveness reminding Maya again of how quickly children absorb emotional undercurrents. We are, Richard confirmed, drawing out a chair for him. Your mother and I have something important to discuss with you. With remarkable sensitivity and coordination, Richard and Charlotte explained the upcoming changes to Ethan. They emphasized that the arrangement was exploratory, presented it as an adventure rather than a disruption, and assured him that both parents would remain actively involved in his life regardless of where he lived. Ethan's initial reaction was quiet consideration, processing the information with a maturity that both concerned and impressed Maya. Then came the questions, thoughtful, practical inquiries about his school, his belongings, his routines. What about Maya? He asked finally, turning to her with worried eyes. Will you come to Boston too? Maya glanced at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. I'll be visiting regularly, she assured Ethan. Your dad and I have already talked about that. I'll help you set up your learning space in Boston, just like we have here, and we can continue our projects long distance. And when you're in New York for spring semester, Maya will be here waiting, Richard added. Your relationship with her doesn't change, buddy. Just the logistics of how you spend time together. Ethan considered this, then asked the question that revealed his deepest concern. But what if, after trying Boston, Mom wants me to stay there forever. What happens to all of us then? The raw vulnerability in his voice created a moment of profound connection among the adults in the room. Charlotte reached for his hand first. "Ethan, listen to me," she said gently. "Your father and I both love you more than anything in the world. Whatever decisions we make in the future will be based on what's best for you, and will always include keeping you connected to the people who matter in your life. That includes Maya. And me," Richard added with a slight smile, drawing a matching one from his son. "And your dad," Charlotte agreed. "Oh, we're not a traditional family anymore, but we're still your family. That doesn't change with geography." Maya, watching this exchange, felt a surge of admiration for both parents. Despite their past conflicts and present complications, they were united in prioritizing their son's emotional security. The conversation continued through brunch, with practical details interspersed with reassurances. By the time Charlotte prepared to leave, Ethan had moved from anxiety to cautious excitement about aspects of the change, particularly the proximity to his grandparents and the house with a yard where Charlotte mentioned he could perhaps have a dog. After Charlotte's departure, Richard suggested Ethan might want to call his best friend to share the news. Once he disappeared to his room, Richard turned to Maya. "That went better than I expected," he admitted, beginning to clear the table. "You and Charlotte handled it beautifully," Maya said, joining him in the task. "Your unity made all the difference." "We haven't always been so aligned," Richard acknowledged. "The perspective you offered helped me approach this differently than I might have otherwise." They worked together companionably, falling into the comfortable rhythm they had developed over months of shared routines. As Maya rinsed plates and passed them to Richard to load in the dishwasher, she found herself studying his profile, the strong jaw, the intensity of his concentration, even on this mundane task. The slight softening around his eyes that had developed in recent months. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Richard looked up, understanding her question went beyond the immediate logistics. "Now we prepare Ethan for this transition as best we can. We make plans for maintaining connections despite the distance. And he paused, searching for the right words, "Can we continue building whatever this is between us, if you're willing." The directness of his statement both surprised and moved Maya. "I'd like that," she admitted, "though I'm still not entirely sure what this is." Richard smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "Neither am I exactly. But I know it matters to me more than I expected. More than I thought anything could outside of Ethan and my work." "It matters to me too," Maya said softly. They stood for a moment in the sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows, acknowledging the uncertainty ahead while committing to navigate it together. Whatever storms might come, they had built a shelter in their understanding of one another that offered protection for themselves and, most importantly, for the boy who connected them. The autumn leaves in Boston's public garden created a tapestry of red and gold as Maya walked alongside Ethan, listening to his animated description of his science class project. 2 months had passed since his move to Boston, and while the transition hadn't been without challenges, Ethan was adapting with the resilience children often display when supported by adults who put their needs first. "Miss Abernathy says my hypothesis is really advanced," Ethan explained, referring to his new science teacher. "I told her you helped me understand the scientific method last year." "I'm glad you're enjoying the class," Maya replied, smiling at his enthusiasm. "It sounds like Miss Abernathy recognizes how capable you are." This was Maya's 3rd visit to Boston since Ethan's relocation. Richard had kept his promise about maintaining connections, arranging for her to join him every few weeks as they supported Ethan's adjustment to his new environment. Between visits, they maintained virtual connections, scheduled video calls where Maya continued their educational projects, reading sessions via tablet, and impromptu check-ins when Ethan wanted to share a discovery or achievement. Richard was currently meeting with Charlotte to discuss Ethan's progress, leaving Maya and Ethan to enjoy the afternoon together. Tomorrow, all 4 would attend Ethan's first soccer game with his new team, another example of the collaborative approach the adults had developed. "I miss our terrace garden," Ethan said as they paused to watch the swan boats gliding across the pond. "But Grandma's helping me plant a real garden in the backyard for spring. We're going to grow vegetables and flowers." "That sounds wonderful," Maya encouraged him. You'll have to send me pictures as things start to grow. Or you could just come see it, Ethan suggested, his expression hopeful. When I'm back in New York for spring, will you be coming to Boston sometimes too? The question revealed his underlying concern about the impending reversal of their current arrangement. In January, according to the agreement Richard and Charlotte had reached, Ethan would return to New York for the spring semester, while Charlotte commuted to Boston for her hospital duties. I imagine I will, Maya assured him. Your dad and I haven't worked out all the details yet, but maintaining our connection is important to both of us. Ethan nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. Dad's different when you're around, you know, happier. The observation, delivered with a child's forthright simplicity, caught Maya off guard. Is he? Definitely, Ethan confirmed. Mum noticed too. She said Dad seems more integrated now, whatever that means. Maya smiled at his accurate quotation of what was clearly an adult conversation he had overheard. I think it means your dad has found a better balance between work and the rest of his life. Because of you, Ethan stated with certainty. I think it's more because of you, Maya countered gently. Your dad loves you very much. He wants to be the best father he can be. Ethan considered this as they continued walking. Maybe it's because of both of us, he concluded with the wisdom that sometimes emerges unexpectedly from children. Later that evening, after Ethan had gone to bed in Charlotte's elegant Beacon Hill home, Maya and Richard sat in the living room of his newly purchased Boston apartment. Richard had invested in this second residence to facilitate his frequent visits, creating a space that, while less grand than the New York penthouse, offered comfort and stability for his time with Ethan. Charlotte says he's thriving academically, Richard reported, loosening his tie as he settled onto the sofa beside Maya. The smaller class sizes seem to be working well for him, and he's made several good friends already. He seems happy, Maya agreed, more confident socially than I've seen him before. Richard nodded, his expression thoughtful. Charlotte thinks we should consider letting him finish the school year in Boston, rather than disrupting him with another transition in January. Maya studied his face, noting the lack of defensiveness that would have characterized such a suggestion months ago. How do you feel about that? Mixed, Richard admitted. I miss having him home, of course, but seeing him flourish here, it's hard to argue against that. He turned to Maya with a rueful smile. I'm trying to take your advice about focusing on what's best for Ethan rather than what I want. That's not an easy perspective to maintain, Maya acknowledged, especially when it comes to someone you love. No, it isn't, Richard agreed, his gaze lingering on her face. But I'm learning that sometimes what you think you want isn't actually what brings the greatest happiness. The statement hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the immediate context of Ethan's living arrangements. Over the past months, their relationship had evolved in ways neither had fully anticipated. The professional boundaries that once defined their interactions had gradually softened, allowing a more personal connection to emerge. Charlotte asked about us, Richard said after a comfortable silence. Maya raised an eyebrow. What did she want to know? So whether we've figured out what we are to each other yet. Richard's tone was light, but his eyes held a question. I told her we're still working on the definition. Maya smiled at the diplomatic response. That's a fair assessment, is it? Richard asked more seriously now. We've been working on the definition for months, Maya. Maybe it's time we acknowledged what's happening here. Maya felt her heart quicken. Their relationship had indeed shifted progressively from professional to personal, with the lines increasingly blurred during their shared visits to Boston. They had spent hours discussing Ethan, certainly, but also literature, politics, their respective childhoods, hopes and philosophies. The growing comfort between them was undeniable, as was the underlying attraction neither had directly addressed. What do you think is happening? She asked, her voice quiet but steady. Richard considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. I think I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. Actually, that's not quite accurate. I think I've already fallen in love with you, and I'm only now finding the courage to say it aloud. The directness of his declaration took Maya's breath away. Richard had never been one to evade difficult truths, but his emotional honesty was still developing, a work in progress she had witnessed evolving over their months together. Richard, she began, uncertain how to respond to the unexpected confession. You don't need to say anything right now, he assured her quickly. I know this complicates an already complex situation. You came into our lives to care for Ethan, not to deal with his father developing feelings for you. If you need time or if you don't feel the same way, I understand. I value your role in Ethan's life too much to risk that, regardless of anything else. Maya reached for his hand, surprising herself with the instinctive gesture. It's not that I don't feel the same way, she said carefully. It's that I never expected this to happen. When I accepted the position with Ethan, I was focused on making a difference in his life and building financial security for myself and my family. The possibility of this wasn't even on my radar. Nor mine, Richard admitted. After the divorce, I was convinced that particular chapter of my life was closed. I had Ethan and my work, that seemed sufficient. And yet here we are, Maya said softly. Here we are, Richard agreed, his fingers intertwining with hers. So where do we go from here? It was the pragmatic question of a man accustomed to charting courses and implementing strategies, yet Maya heard the vulnerability beneath the words. For all his wealth and power, Richard was as uncertain in this territory as she was. I think we acknowledge what's happening between us, Maya suggested. We continue to prioritize Ethan's well-being above all else, and we take things slowly, figuring out what a relationship between us might look like given all the complexities involved. Richard smiled, visibly relieved by her response. That sounds like a reasonable approach. Very measured and sensible. Did you expect something less sensible from me? Maya teased gently. No, Richard chuckled. Sensible is one of the things I love about you. Along with your compassion, your insight, your dedication to what matters, and your ability to see beyond surfaces to what's real. The simple enumeration of her qualities, spoken with such genuine appreciation, touched Maya deeply. In her previous relationships, she had often felt the need to minimize aspects of herself. Her seriousness, her priorities, her focus on education and social justice. With Richard, those very qualities seemed to be what had drawn him to her. May I kiss you? He asked quietly, the formality of the request reflecting his respect for her boundaries. Maya answered by leaning forward, meeting him halfway in a kiss that was both gentle and momentous, the crossing of a threshold they had been approaching for months. When they separated, Maya felt a certainty that had been building within her, crystallizing in this moment of connection. I love you too, she said simply. I think I have for some time, but I needed to be sure it wasn't just gratitude or admiration or the unique circumstances that brought us together. And now you're sure? I'm sure that what I feel for you is real, Maya clarified. I'm still not entirely sure what shape it will take in our lives, given everything else we're navigating, but I'm willing to figure it out together. Richard's smile was luminous, a full, unguarded expression of joy that transformed his features. That's all I can ask for. They spent the remainder of the evening talking about practical considerations, about their hopes and concerns, about how to approach this evolution in their relationship with Ethan and Charlotte. The conversation was honest, sometimes challenging, but undergirded by the mutual respect and understanding they had built over months of working together for Ethan's benefit. The next morning brought Ethan's soccer game, a chilly but bright autumn, Saturday filled with the cheers of parents and the determined efforts of 8-year-olds still mastering the fundamentals of the sport. Maya sat between Richard and Charlotte in the bleachers, aware of the unusual tableau they presented, but increasingly comfortable with the unconventional family unit they were creating. When Ethan scored his first goal, all 3 adults leaped to their feet in celebration, their shared joy in his achievement transcending any awkwardness in their situation. Ethan's beaming face as he searched the stands for their approval confirmed for Maya that they were on the right path, despite its complexity. After the game, as they walked toward Charlotte's car for the celebratory lunch they had planned, Ethan ran ahead with his teammates while the adults followed at a more measured pace. So, Charlotte said with a knowing glance between Maya and Richard, it seems congratulations might be in order. Richard looked startled. We haven't... Please, Richard, Charlotte interrupted with a hint of amusement. I was married to you for 10 years. I know what it looks like when you've made an important decision. She turned to Maya with a more genuine expression. For what it's worth, I think you're good for him. More importantly, you're good for Ethan, which is what truly matters to me. Maya appreciated the straightforward acknowledgement. Thank you. Ethan's well-being is my priority too. I know that, Charlotte affirmed. Here's why I'm comfortable with this arrangement, unconventional as it may be. Ethan deserves to be surrounded by adults who put his needs first while modeling healthy relationships of their own. The lunch that followed was surprisingly pleasant, a blend of celebrating Ethan's achievement and the four of them navigating their evolving connections with good humor and mutual respect. Maya observed Ethan's comfort with the situation, his easy movement between his parents, his inclusive glances to ensure she felt part of the conversation. For a child who had initially struggled with the divorce, he was showing remarkable adjustment to this new family configuration. That evening, after a full day of activities, Richard and Maya returned to his apartment while Ethan remained with Charlotte. As they settled onto the terrace with tea, watching the lights of Boston flicker against the darkening sky, Richard returned to their conversation from the previous evening. I've been thinking about what you said about taking things slowly and figuring out what a relationship between us might look like, he began. I want you to know I'm committed to making that work, whatever form it takes. Maya appreciated his earnestness. I believe you, but there are practical considerations we need to address. My position in your household was defined around caring for Ethan. If our relationship changes, that role becomes more complicated. Richard nodded thoughtfully. I've considered that. What if we redefine your role entirely? You're nearly finished with your education degree. The Children's Hospital program you've been consulting on has already expressed interest in bringing you on full-time once you graduate. You've been thinking about this for a while, Maya observed, touched by his consideration of her professional future. I want you in my life, in our lives, because it's what you choose, not because it's your job, Richard explained. That means supporting your independence, your career goals, your identity beyond your connection to Ethan and me. The statement embodied everything Maya had come to value about Richard, his respect for her autonomy, his understanding of what mattered to her, his willingness to adapt his life to accommodate her needs as well as his own. Thank you, she said simply. That means a great deal to me. As winter approached, bringing holiday preparations and the impending decision about Ethan's spring semester, Maya found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey of the past year. From that first phone call warning of danger to Ethan, through her integration into the Thornhill household, to the current evolution of her relationship with Richard, each step had seemed both unexpected and somehow inevitable. The weekend before Christmas, exactly 1 year after Maya had first visited the penthouse, all four of them gathered in New York to celebrate the holiday. The decision had been made, with Ethan's input significantly considered, that he would remain at his Boston school through spring, while spending extended weekends and holidays in New York. The arrangement would be reassessed for the following school year, with an emphasis on maintaining stability while nurturing all the important relationships in his life. On Christmas Eve, after Ethan and Charlotte had retired to the guest rooms, Richard invited Maya to join him on the terrace. The night was clear and cold. The city spread below them adorned with festive lights, a light dusting of snow adding a magical quality to the scene. I have something for you, Richard said, producing a small wrapped package. I know we agreed to exchange gifts tomorrow, but this one felt private. Maya unwrapped the gift carefully to reveal a velvet box containing a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a bridge, set with a small diamond that caught the light from the terrace lamps. It's beautiful, she said, lifting it for a closer look. It's meant to represent what you've done in our lives, Richard explained. How you've built bridges between Ethan and me, between our world and yours, between who I was and who I'm becoming. The thoughtfulness of the gift moved Maya deeply. Thank you. It's perfect. Richard helped her fasten the necklace, his fingers warm against her skin despite the December chill. As she turned to face him, Maya was struck by how far they had come from their first meeting. The desperate father and the concerned young woman from different worlds, now standing together as partners in something neither had anticipated. I have something for you too, Maya said, reaching into her pocket for a small envelope. It's not as elegant, but it felt right. Richard opened the envelope to find a simple card containing a key. It's to my new apartment, Maya explained. I signed the lease last week. It's in Chelsea. halfway between NYU, where I'll be finishing my degree, and the Children's Hospital, where I'll be working part-time while I complete my studies. Richard looked at her questioningly, turning the key over in his hand. I need my own space, Maya continued, especially as our relationship evolves. A place that's mine, where I can build my independent life while we figure out what we're becoming together. She smiled at his expression. Don't worry. It's a nice building with good security. You'd approve. Richard laughed, understanding her completely. You continue to surprise me, Maya Garcia. Is that a good thing? It's the best thing, he assured her, drawing her close. Most people in my life tell me what they think I want to hear. You tell me what I need to understand, whether I want to hear it or not. And yet you love me anyway, Maya teased gently. Because of it? Not despite it, Richard corrected, his expression growing serious. You've taught me that true connection isn't about finding someone who fits neatly into the spaces of your existing life. It's about being willing to reshape your life to create new spaces where you can grow together. The insight surprised Maya, not because she disagreed, but because it so perfectly articulated what had been happening between them over the past year. That's exactly it, she agreed softly. As they stood together looking out over the city where their unlikely story had begun, Maya reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had led them to this moment. A desperate phone call, a child in potential danger. Two people from different worlds brought together by circumstance, but connected by something deeper. Shared values, mutual respect, and eventually love. Tomorrow would bring Christmas celebrations with Ethan and Charlotte, followed by visits with Maya's family in the Bronx, where Richard would continue getting to know the people who had shaped her. The new year would bring fresh challenges as they all adapted to their evolving arrangements and relationships. There were still questions to be answered, details to be worked out, boundaries to be navigated, but tonight, standing on the terrace where they had first begun to see each other as more than employer and employee, Maya felt a profound certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together as they had faced everything since that first fateful day when she had taken a risk and made a call that changed both their lives forever. The full circle of their journey wasn't an ending but a beginning, the foundation for a future none of them could have imagined, but which now stretched before them, full of possibility and hope. "Merry Christmas, Maya," Richard whispered, his arms warm around her despite the winter chill. "Merry Christmas." "Richard," she replied, leaning into his embrace as the snow began to fall more heavily, transforming the city into a glittering wonderland below them. In that moment, the distance between their worlds, once so vast and seemingly unbridgeable, had never felt smaller or less significant.